have gobs of evidence that says that they have great health outcomes.
And that's why they'll never catch on.
It's so bizarre.
Seriously, that's why they'll never catch on. It's because there's like hard data, and data doesn't motivate people. Fear does. Hello, and welcome to Middleish, the podcast about moderation and all things. I am Michael Gray.
And I am Aaron Green.
What is going on, Aaron Green?
What is going on? I'll tell you what's going off, and that's my internet connection. And
that's my
really annoyed. My patience. Michael and I were texting back and forth this morning because I was like, hey, just a heads up, I can barely load any web pages and I'm really struggling. And we have an important episode. And so the pressure was on. And yeah, it's amazing what happens when all of a sudden the internet is funky.
It's okay.
I actually pitched a lot of my old textbooks, physiology textbooks and biochemistry and all that when we moved probably, 4 years ago when we moved. Mm-hmm. I was like, I don't need these things anymore. I can look anything up on the internet that I need to know, that I need to brush up on biochemistry. And guess what?
Anytime. It's always there.
Here we are screaming at the computer.
Right. So before we get into things, I think we need to catch everybody up and address something. So as of recording last week, so this will be a few weeks ago when this airs, Aaron and I had this discussion about when you're blowing your nose to use Kleenex or toilet paper. And so we put up a poll and the official results are in, and it was pretty close. It was closer than I thought it was going to be honest.
Yeah, it was pretty well split.
Yeah, it was the final totals were for Kleenex, 56%, for toilet paper, 44%. Yeah,
very close.
It was. Yeah, yes. I didn't think it was going to be that close. I assumed most people use Kleenex.
I didn't either. In fact, I meant to look up that little tidbit.
Yeah. So it was close. It was real close. Mm-hmm. So thank you to everyone who participated in our poll, our very official way of collecting data. So I think we can say that 56% of the country
publish this in the research.
Yep, uses Kleenex and 44% uses toilet paper. We can just go ahead and say that. Yeah.
Well, so I had one friend, a friend of the podcast that listens often, my friend Scott Steiner, messaged me and was like, when I put up the poll, he's like, I use both. And I was like, okay, but do you keep Kleenex around your house so that you can use it? And then if you happen to be in a situation where there isn't a Kleenex nearby, maybe you'll use toilet paper. So do you keep Kleenex to use as a facial tissue around your house? And he goes, yeah, and a box in the car. I'm like, Team Kleenex, that is you.
But that wasn't the question.
I think it was.
Okay. If we're going to be scientific at all, like this is a ridiculous thing, but that wasn't the question. We don't get to say, this counts too. So I think, was it Steve? Is that what his name was? Steve? Scott. I got the letter right. Scott. Sorry, Scott.
Started with an S counts. Though.
We have to throw Scott's vote out. Samsonite.
Well, I looked through the answers and Scott actually didn't answer the poll on Instagram. Okay. So he wasn't counted in that 56%. Anyway, thanks for playing along, everyone. We're really excited to have.
It was kind of fun to watch over that 24 hours. Like, where are we at? No.
I actually did I did find out how to put the poll up on Anchor too. So it shows up on Spotify. And I looked and the majority of our listeners are on Apple Podcasts. And so I don't think that the poll will go through Apple Podcasts, but it does pop up on Spotify. So I did figure out how to do that. So when we have more polls or Q&A, or, if you need to settle an argument between Michael and I in the future, we will put that up.
And we probably don't have the results from that yet, do we?
well, nobody answered it apparently on Spotify. So that's why I'm mentioning it, because I don't know if people realize that.
Okay.
So, I mean, I would
we'll
imagine,
just go with what we got.
Yeah, I'd imagine people, if they're listening on a platform, they just kind of queue it up, or it's in their playlist. And so maybe they don't even look at their device when they're listening. So anyway, I have one more housekeeping item to talk about, and that is asking people, if you're listening to this podcast right now, ask yourself, have I rated or written a review for Michael and Aaron lately?
Go ahead. Do it right now. Do it right now.
We'll
give you a minute.
Yeah, we'll wait. We'll wait.
Or ever. I like that. Lately or ever. Have you ever done it?
Not accusing anybody of anything. However,
even if it sounds like it,
I see how many listeners we have, and I also see how many reviews and ratings we have. And there's a discrepancy, folks. So
we're not looking for 100%, but some more would be great.
Something in the middle-ish. Right now we're in the lower-ish. So.
We're in the lower-ish. I'm glad we didn't pick that name for our podcast. Welcome to lower-ish.
Welcome to the bottom feeders.
Feeders. Who could we have as guests?
What a great title for a podcast. Everybody's in this.
This is my neighbor. He's an asshole. We're gonna interview him.
Hey, this jerk just cut me off driving down the street. I'm going to flag him down and see if he wants to be on lower-ish, the podcast about shitty things and despair.
Podcast about all things terrible.
So that's my PSA is we rely on you all to help us spread the word. Yes, there are some things that we could be doing to promote our podcast a little more, and we're working on those things behind the scenes, but we really rely on our listeners. And we love getting feedback from people that say, I loved this episode, or this really resonated with me, or yes, I use Kleenex. Michael is an idiot. Any of those things we love hearing.
I don't think anybody said that. I don't think we love hearing those. Is this liar-ish now, or are we just saying false things?
Fibberish. We're fibbing our way through. However, back to my original point, we love getting feedback. We hear the feedback, and we want you to take action to help us grow this podcast and promote it and share it with others. So if you are one of the people who have not shared, reviewed, liked, written, or rated on any of your platforms, please do so. We would appreciate it, and we love you. Mwah. Thanks.
Very, very much appreciate it. Yeah.
All right. Okay. That's it.
No more house cleaning? You don't do any mopping or dishes or anything?
Oh, geez. I have all kinds of cleaning to do. Every morning I sweep a little area of the floor because Rally Cat, we got this new litter. It's supposed to be lightweight litter. It's really nice because if you've ever picked up a box of kitty litter, it's heavy stuff. So we got this new lightweight litter, and I think it sticks to his paws easier. And there's crunch, 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 crunch all the way from the litter box into the living room. And so every morning I'm cleaning house.
Fun.
It's a good thing he's cute.
Are you talking about Rally or Matt?
Rally. Oh, yeah, Matt's cute too, but he doesn't track litter everywhere.
So every morning, Matt leaves a little pile of litter on the floor.
Jeez, can you be clean when you go to the bathroom?
Yeah, the litter box is closer to the bathroom, It's got to go in the morning. So this is episode 75. We're recording right now. So that's kind of cool. 3/4 of a way to 100, which is almost a year. Or another year, 2 years, I mean.
Almost 2 years, yeah.
Wild.
It's great.
Yeah, that's wild.
It's been fun. And I get excited every time we go through and come up with new topics and guests and keep taking this in different directions. I'm actually kind of amazed. Like sometimes it is hard to come up with different topics. And that's where, hey, listeners, you guys come in because we would love to hear what you want us to cover. And I've had some really good suggestions. So we are covering those things too. But I am kind of amazed that we continue to find things to talk about.
Well, yeah, me too. But then like when we get into something, like I think a lot of times it's, at least for me, like in my thinking, I was like, well, we've kind of already covered this topic. And then we'll do something like kind of similar to a topic we've done, maybe a year ago, but like with a little bit different angle. And we always wind up going to all these new places. And it's a good reminder for me of how broad and vast like this whole concept is, and how many things there are to talk about. I mean, even if we talked about emotional eating, I mean, we could record another emotional eating episode and talk about a ton of different things and, have very little overlap. And so it reminds me of like how much we have to kind of like chop off and not talk about a lot,
Yeah. But, Cause I mean, we really could, when we get into some of these topics, you can just keep going and, diving into different directions and you always have new stories and experiences, right? So things that you and I share in our lives that we, have been working on, or we've realized about ourselves, or we've discussed with a client. I mean, that kind of stuff is always evolving and emerging because we practice this kind of stuff every day with our people.
Yeah. So, and I think that's where a lot of like topics for me come. It's just like when you're talking with clients, like they're constantly telling you, here's what I don't understand, or what about this, or I have this question, or, and yeah. So all that being said, do you want to dive into today's topic?
Yes.
Do you need to catch us up on anything? Life or anything?
I don't think so. I do have one announcement to make because Michael called me out. So by the time you hear this podcast, you will have heard the last one we recorded.
What I do?
When we were talking about leaning into discomfort, you were like, oh, hey, Aaron, I mentioned that I'm reading Brad Stulberg's book. Right. And you're like, oh, hey, well, since you're kind of uncomfortable about asking him to be on the podcast, why don't you lean into that discomfort? Okay. So I did. I emailed Brad Stulberg and I heard back from him literally within minutes. Great response. And he politely declined to be on our podcast because that man is busy. He's got his own podcast. He just launched his book. I totally accept it. And I'm happy that I at least asked him and got a response. And, maybe down the road, if he's not so busy, or if we ping him again, maybe we'll wear him down a little bit.
Hey, you never know.
and see if he'll join us. But
anyway, never know. Yeah. And you could feel free, as listeners, to shoot him a message. Hey, there's this podcast I think you'd love. I'd love to have you on it. I think you should, maybe think about being a guest.
Yeah.
You never know.
Yeah.
You never know.
Team approach. We'll see.
And I'm glad you accepted it. I'm glad you weren't like, I don't accept this.
I'm going to stalk you until
Wrong
you
answer. Try again, Brad.
Why don't you say yes to everything? All of your teachings are about boundaries and finding that sustainable middle, blah, blah, blah. Why don't you say yes to this? Damn it.
Like in the TV shows, like when someone tries to break up with someone, they're like, no, I don't think, we don't break up. No, I don't accept that.
It's actually, it's a little creeperish. I'm watching scary movies around Halloween, and that's how a lot of them kind of start. It's with that unacceptable. Oh, no. This is how things work, actually.
Do you have a favorite Halloween movie, scary movie?
A favorite scary movie?
Or Halloween.
I don't know
if I have Charlie Brown and the Great Pumpkin.
Yeah, I like some of the lighthearted Halloween, like Hocus Pocus, I think is kind of fun. Actually, the other day, Shrek came on when Matt and I were my meeting in the mundane is about our activities this weekend. So I'll share that later, but we just had the TV playing in the background and Shrek came on and we were just like, you'd just hear a punchline and start giggling and be like, gosh, Shrek. And it's not really a Halloween movie, but it's, it's ogres and fantasy and kind of, anyway. So
nice.
I don't know that I have a favorite. How about you? Do you?
No, I don't think so. I don't know that we even really watch Halloween movies. And my girls wind up watching Halloween stuff because there's like Halloween themed stuff on, Disney Plus or Netflix or whatever. But
right.
we never really, we do Christmas movies. I think that's about the only holiday we do like specific movies, you know, but that's a whole season. Like Halloween's not, maybe for some people, Halloween's a season. For us, it's like a day or a couple days.
Yeah. Like a one.
Yeah.
We watched Casper. Actually, I watched Casper on Sunday morning because I was just puttering around the house and turn on the TV. I'm like, oh, Casper's on. I haven't seen that one for a while. So that one's cute. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good one. That's an old one. That's from when we were kids.
I know. That's probably why I like it. It's a classic.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll stop BSing you all and we'll get into our topic of the day.
The topic of the day. We have teased and talked about doing this episode since very early on. Yeah. Like 75 weeks now. And so today we're going to talk about, drumroll,
ketogenic diets.
Ding, 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 ding. Yeah, let's do it. Let's get into keto. And everybody take a deep breath. Everybody unpucker. It's gonna be okay.
Michael's ready. He's so ready to rant on this one. I think that you all, I hope that you will be kind of pleasantly surprised that the point of this discussion isn't to just rail against keto in general. It's to help shed some light and really provide some background and some evidence behind the ketogenic diet, what it is and what it isn't, how it has grabbed hold, why it was originally designed and discovered, what some of the evidence says about using it for different means, whether it's weight loss or, controlling diabetes or whatever, and what it looks like. Really, I have this saying, how's that working for you? And people say, or like they want to try something or they're doing something, I'll say, well, how's that working for you? I think with the ketogenic diet, that's a really important question. It's same with intermittent fasting or the paleo diet or whatever it is that people, veganism. I mean, any diet that like severely shifts your eating pattern, your approach to food, your lifestyle, and your social interactions, all of that stuff. I think it's really important to be honest with how is that working for you? And we'll talk about that.
Yep, I agree. And I think, honestly, I think that's the approach we take no matter what someone's doing, right? Like, even if it's not a name, we ask them, well, like, is this working? Is this healthy? Does this work for you? And Aaron and I, if you ask us to list, hey, look, what are 5 good tenets for living a healthy life or whatever, things to live by or things to include or ways to change your diet, whatever, we'd come up with a list real quick. But to say that people need to do things in a certain way, like that's where things become problematic. Like for me, I don't have an issue with the ketogenic diet in and of itself. I have concerns with it. With anyone doing it, I don't have an issue with it. And I think that's an important distinction. My issue is when people feel like they have to take very specific guidelines and apply them to their life, but I have that same concern with anything, right? Like let's not just take general information. This is what I must do. Let's work the other way. Like what works for you? What's going to work well in your life? How do we do this? And so for me, a lot of my beef with the ketogenic diet isn't the diet in and of itself. It's with this misguided understanding that this is what you're supposed to do. And now carbs are bad. And we have, all this stuff that comes along with it that people feel like they have to adopt and fit into their life. For me, that's the real problem. So if you're a keto fan, cool, or not dogging on it in general. If you're someone who's a keto fan and insists everyone do it, then yeah, you're a real problem in my mind.
Yeah. And I think if you're curious about it, like I know there are people out there that, by now the ketogenic diet has been around for a long time. And so,
100 years
right. I should clarify my statement. the ketogenic fad has been around long enough that I think enough people have probably investigated it. And there's just a truckload of websites out there that you can find all kinds of jacked up information. I bet there's, a lot.
Boatloads.
There's a lot. Just enter ketogenic diet or ketogenic weight loss on Google and just see what you get. It's it's really ridiculous. And I have a story about an unsolicited email that I got the other day and the rabbit hole I went down. So
I get those a lot about keto stuff. Like,
it's so weird. I'm like, you don't know me. What are you doing?
Yeah. Like, can you do like a little bit of like research to see like who you're sending things to?
Right.
Yeah.
So since we already acknowledged that the ketogenic diet has been around for 100 years, let's talk a little bit about the background and why it came to be.
Let's do that.
So in the 1920s, 100 years ago, the first clinical trials were done on high fat, low carb diet for epilepsy at the Mayo Clinic. So this is, and specifically childhood epilepsy is where we tend to see and I'll use the term clinical ketogenic diet because that's where this originated from. It has been studied in a very tightly controlled clinical setting where lab values are monitored regularly. The diet is precisely weighed out and measured. And we'll talk a little more about what that looks like, what kinds of foods and, how precise that is. And there are necessary supplementation for the clinical ketogenic diet. So just remember that this started as a clinical intervention for childhood epilepsy. It didn't start as a weight loss, read a website page and you can implement it and here you go. It's going to magically cure all your ills.
Right. So not unlike like gluten-free, right? Like that's something that came from a clinical place to treat things like celiac and Crohn's disease and it was done for medical purposes to treat something very specific. And then, it gets grabbed a hold of by whatever idiots grab a hold of things and they decide to pervert it and use it for other reasons, Yeah, that's kind of what happens in these industries a little too often, but we've talked about that a bunch. So do you want to talk about specifically like what it is to be in ketosis?
Yeah. So, basically we're looking at very low carbohydrate, high fat, and low to moderate protein for the ketogenic diet as it is clinically studied and we have evidence for. So
like 75% fat. Like high fat.
Remember that episode that we did, I don't know what number it is, but we talked about macronutrients and we talked about the AMDR, the acceptable macronutrient distribution ranges. And basically you are pushing carbohydrates where it typically is around 45 to 65% of calories. That's the acceptable macronutrient distribution range for carbohydrates. You're pushing it down to 5% or less of total calories is carbohydrate. Not very much. And then as you just said, fat is boosted from that 10 to 35% up to like 70 to 90%, depending on how, clinically how you are controlling this diet. And then protein is kept at a moderate level. So protein is somewhere around that 10% range. Now, I think this is a really important distinction to make. If somebody doesn't control for protein, we tend to think of ketogenic diets being very specific carbohydrate to fat ratio. If you're not controlling for protein, you can kick yourself out of ketosis. So ketosis is basically the state where your body is relying more on fat for energy than carbohydrate, which is its preferred source. So if you run carbohydrate intake low enough, not to get too far into biochemistry, but let's just say your metabolic cycle and mechanism that tends to say, oh, here's carbohydrate. We're going to turn it into this molecule and then shunt it into this pathway. And we're going to create energy from that. this is our preferred kind of thoroughfare highway for metabolism. If you run carbohydrate low enough, again, down around that 5% or less, and you have abundant fat, that 70% or more of calories coming from fat, your body's going to go, oh, hold on a second. We don't have enough carbohydrate to do this, but we have a ton of fat here to work with. So we're going to take fat and we're going to convert it into these different molecules and use that for energy, specifically for the brain, because our brain runs off of glucose. That's its preferred energy substrate, but it can run off of ketones. And so your body, hello, body wisdom, it's very smart. And your body goes, oh, okay, well, we have a truckload of fat here that we can turn into energy for the brain and for the body cells. Let's go ahead and use that in the way we know best, which is turning it into ketones. It basically, you get a buildup of these different molecules that your body needs to do something with, and it'll turn it into ketones, and your body will use that as energy. Takes usually, I've heard everything from like 48 hours to a week to really get yourself. Most evidence says 3 to 4 days and of very consistent, tightly controlled dietary changes, and your body will reach a state of ketosis. It's also important. One last point here. It's important to discern between ketosis and ketoacidosis, which is a very serious medical condition that happens when you get too much of a buildup of ketone bodies. So it's something that usually someone with a medical condition like diabetes would experience ketoacidosis. I think it would be really difficult to intentionally put yourself into ketoacidosis just following, your run-of-the-mill ketogenic diet, but not impossible. So just something to keep in mind there.
So real quick, episode 62 was the macro episode. So if you want to learn more about macros, episode 62. Yeah. Also, I think it's important to note like the difference between low carb and keto.
Yeah,
right? Like
huge.
Keto isn't like, it's not just a way of eating like low carb is. It's a way of living basically, because it's getting your body, like Aaron said, into this different metabolic process, and it's your body operating differently, right? So like low carb is one thing, but just because you're eating low carb doesn't mean you're in ketosis. And if you're not in ketosis, you're not doing a ketogenic diet, right? This is a very specific thing that alters how your body is essentially generating energy for you to use. And so oftentimes people are like, yeah, I'm doing keto. Well, tell me about it. And it's like, no, you're just doing low carb. Like, yeah. Oh, you're having like 80 grams of carbs a day and a cheat meal. And that, like, no, you're just doing low carb. This is not at all ketogenic diet. They look similar in some ways, but it's to be doing the ketogenic diet, you have to be in ketosis. And if you haven't tested to be in ketosis, you don't know if you're in ketosis. And if you don't know that, you're probably not doing that. You're probably doing a low carb diet, which is fine too, whatever, but they're different things. It's a very specific thing. And I think it's really got blended. Keto has become synonymous with low carb.
Low carb.
Yeah. And just kind of the, general vernacular. And they're very different things. Yeah.
I'll never forget. A few years ago, I had a friend that proclaimed that they were doing the ketogenic diet, and we were planning this, have them over for dinner and football. And I was like, okay, well, I can make very low carb meals, that just have, or I can make like a meat dish that you just avoid whatever other things are going on. And I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to tell you like how to put it together. I'm just going to make the offerings and just say like, okay, I understand that you have special dietary considerations and this is what I'm making. So you can decide how it works for you.
You just put like a bowl of butter on the table for him?
No, I didn't quite go that far. Okay. But I just said ahead of time, this is what we're making. I'm sure you could find a way to make this work. So my friend comes over and starts like dishing up, and I had, I'm trying to remember how this played out, but I think I had some cheese and sour cream. It was like a chili dish, but it didn't have, you could, make the beans optional or whatever. So it's just meat and sauce and whatever. And so they asked for sour cream, and I said, I said, I think we have some. And so I brought out the sour cream and they go, oh, I'll just use this instead. And it was non-fat Greek yogurt. And I was like, that ain't ketogenic. That doesn't non-fat. It's non-fat. It's a substantial source of protein and it's got carbs in it. And I'm just watching this and going, and I'm kind of like, well, but there's sour cream there. No, this will work. And I'm like, no, it won't. Like I'm screaming in my head and just that, that scenario plays out often when people say, and we've talked about this all the time, when people say they're doing a certain dietary pattern and they claim it almost like religiously, like I am keto, like I belong to this community, I belong to this movement. And I'm like, but no, you're not. You're not.
Yeah. So. And because it's a big misunderstanding, right? And that's, I think, probably maybe one of the cruxes of our argument or discussion here is that, like, too often we say we're going to do something in an attempt to make ourselves healthier, to, eat better, take better care of ourselves, whatever. And we adopt something we don't in any way understand. And so we say we're going to do this thing in a specific way, and we don't at all understand any of the nuance or how even things work. Like I can't tell you how many people I've talked to about the ketogenic diet that have no idea what ketosis is or what a ketone is or why that's important. It's just the name is keto. It doesn't matter what it is or how it works. It's just a thing that might work for me to lose weight finally. Maybe this is my magic bullet, so I'm doing it. And that's not just keto. That's a bunch of different things, a bunch of different approaches. And like, I remember when gluten was real big, or like gluten-free was kind of the big diet, I don't know, what, 6, 7, 8 years ago. Yeah. And I'd have clients kind of like, yeah, I kind of want to do this like gluten-free. I want to try that out. And I'd talk to them about it. And it's like, they don't even know what gluten is. I just know there are gluten-free items that I can buy and things that I've been told by my friend Nancy that this is low in gluten or what gluten-free, right? Like there's no understanding. It's just a thing that's out there that I've heard about that's supposed to work. So let me try it.
Yeah. And my friend said, or my trainer said, or my doctor said,
yeah. And this is where it becomes really important, I think, to just take that self-agency of like, if you're going to try something, spend a little bit of time reading about it. Look up just pros and cons of whatever, you know what I mean? And just to understand a little bit, like just a touch of what it is, because what we see is like this kind of thing just further like reinforces this desperation, magic bullet approach, right? It's like, I don't need to understand anything. I just need to get the pieces right. And then white knuckle that long enough. That's the answer to being healthy. And it's like, that's such bullshit nonsense. And it's so backwards. And it's like, understanding is the foundation of sustainability. Like what foods work for you, what approach works for you, why you eat the way you do, why you don't eat certain things, why, that understanding is the basis for how we eat better. And when we adopt these things without really knowing what they are, or without knowing in any way what they are, and we just like try to, okay, here's my loose piece together understanding of this diet through like, the cover of magazines in the supermarket and my friend and some stuff I read on the internet. So now I know what to do. And it's like, all we're doing is reinforcing that belief in ourselves that it's just about the action. I just have to fix my actions. And if I can fix my actions, then I'll be fine. And sure, but we don't fix actions by fixing actions. We fix actions by understanding what's driving those actions.
Right. And taking meaningful steps to, move in that direction of where you want to go. And I think one of the keys to when we hear about diets like the keto diet, we have clinical evidence of its use in clinical settings for very specific conditions. And then there's this bizarre sort of extrapolation that happens. And I would love to blame the diet industry at large for this, but I think there's, sometimes the medical community plays a role in promoting some of these things, but it becomes suddenly we have this clinical practice and we start like applying it to the masses. And you have to understand that there are some really specific considerations for practicing the ketogenic diet in a clinical sense versus extrapolating it to the masses. And one of the issues I have with the evidence out there on the ketogenic diet for the, population at large for weight loss or for diabetes or looking at hyperlipidemia or whatever it is. I mean, looking at some of these health conditions, but also looking for, a treatment for obesity. I am not going to go so far as to say there's no evidence to support it. There's evidence that shows promise that like, oh, this is an option, or, hey, there's more to investigate here. Let's actually find some of the mechanisms as to why this might be working in this way or might be presenting this evidence. But so far, the research has a wide variety of, it could be from 10 grams of carbohydrates a day to, which by the way, the ketogenic diet is usually like 20 or less, 10 grams all the way up to 60. And some of them are even going on that macronutrient distribution range of less than 45% of your calories coming from carbohydrates. So you can see how all of a sudden we have, whoa, this is not tightly controlled in these studies. There's this huge variance. And some of these studies don't even control for how much fat is consumed. So they don't say, oh, but you need to make sure it's high fat as well. And they also don't control for protein, because if you eat a high amount of protein or enough protein that your body has an abundance of it, guess what? Your body goes, oh, look, protein, I can convert this to glucose. There's a process.
That's what people don't understand.
Yeah.
Protein has an insulinogenic response. It can raise your blood sugar, and people don't understand that. So if you cut all your carbs and eat a bunch of protein, okay.
You're not in ketosis,
Way to shoot yourself in the foot.
Yeah. And so, and ketosis really, you do have to truly monitor this in a clinical setting just to know, like, what are your ketone levels to make sure that you're in that state of ketosis. So, protein can be converted into glucose. There's a process called gluconeogenesis where, gluco meaning glucose, neo meaning new, and genesis meaning generation. So you're generating new glucose molecules from this protein that has raised your insulin levels. So I think it's, again, another layer of complication to really tightening up this diet to study it adequately in these large populations. A lot of the studies that have been done are like around 150 or fewer participants, some as few as like 10 to 20 participants. And they, there's a lack of really long-term evidence on this. There's a lack of consensus and, standardization of the diet across these clinical studies. So I just want people to be aware that there's still ongoing research. I'm always curious, like, what are we finding? Could this be something that has some truth to it and can be applicable to certain cases and is another option out there for people? It is not the magic bullet. And it's really, we'll talk about, I'll read through here in a second, sample diet. It's really challenging. I would find it very challenging to adhere to a ketogenic diet for the long term. I think low carb, high protein would be much more sustainable for a lot of people. And I know several people who adhere to that kind of diet. So
let's talk real quick, because you kind of mentioned it. Let's talk briefly about like diabetes and keto and that kind of stuff. So a lot of times, people think like type 2, type 1 diabetics, whatever, that the ketogenic diet is the best option because, right, it's low in carbohydrate, so it's easier to manage blood sugar and, that kind of stuff. And which I understand. And I think that there's, I won't say that I think that it's probably a good diet for diabetics, but I think obviously eating lower carbohydrates is good for diabetics, right? To keep those blood sugars under control and monitor and that kind of stuff. So like a lower carbohydrate diet can be really beneficial, right? But there's a whole lot of things that can go on with that. So, but what, you'll see is like a type 2 diabetic, like do keto for a while, right? Or their version of keto, and they'll lose weight and blood sugars are a lot easier to control, or maybe like their A1C levels improve, like numbers look better, this kind of stuff. Well, so what happens then is they often, I think, what's the word? Mistakenly attribute these changes to the ketogenic diet, where what we see is that if you're like a type 2 diabetic, if you lose roughly like 10% of your weight, like a lot of times those numbers are better. And people even say, like you quote unquote reverse your type 2 diabetes because your numbers are pre-diabetic, are below pre-diabetic levels. Blood sugars are improved, insulin sensitivity is increased, that kind of stuff. And that's true if we lose that percentage of weight, regardless of how we lose it. You know what I mean? And so even if you lost 10% of your weight on a high carb diet, right? Because things were controlled, you were, paying attention to your cues, all that kind of stuff, you'd still have the same effect. And so sometimes it's important that when we see a wanted or unwanted result, it's easy to say, well, it's because of this, when that's maybe not always the case. So sure, could something like a low carb or ketogenic diet be helpful for a diabetic? Sure, in the moment, like day after day. Are your blood sugars going to be easier to control? Probably, as long as protein doesn't go through the roof and you shoot yourself in the foot. But as far as like a long-term plan, well, it may not be as important as you think it is, because really, if we can, especially for type 2 diabetics, like if we can, get weight down a little bit, regardless of how we're eating, things are better. And often things are like, yeah, you know what? You're actually pretty good now. So.
Right. And that's one of the other challenges with these clinical studies looking at the ketogenic diet is there's a variance on if they're calorie controlled or not. And we know that if we boil it down to a very simplistic mechanism, weight loss is from a caloric deficit. It doesn't really matter based on the evidence we have available right now. It doesn't really matter how you create that caloric deficit as much as being in a sustainable caloric deficit. Some of the arguments with the ketogenic diet is that when you are in a state of ketosis, true ketosis, you'll have a blunted appetite. A lot of times people report that they don't need to eat as much or they're not as hungry. Of course, appetite suppressants, we know whether they're pharmacological or for other reasons, promote weight loss. They help people lose weight. Now, we could get into a whole argument whether that's, ethical or whether that's what we're supposed to be doing. I will also add that eating is an appetite suppressant. So let's just be honest that what your body is asking for is food. And so there are a lot of options available to you to answer that surge in appetite. And from a more clinical standpoint, I wouldn't say I'm a clinical obesity expert. I don't work in hospitals with, morbidly obese populations, and I'm not brushed up on all of the latest research on how our hormone, mechanisms affect appetite with cases of morbid obesity. I mean, there's a lot of layers there, and we could probably have our friend, Dr. Nadolsky, on here to talk about this much more intelligently than I can. All I'm trying to say, my point, is that creating that caloric deficit for weight loss specifically is the ultimate, goal. How you do that really matters on what you can sustain, what's doable and livable for you. So to your point, Michael, we see this 10% weight loss in individuals, and all of a sudden we're like, whoa, better blood lipid values, better blood glucose control, better insulin sensitivity. We see even, changes in the endocrine system and how their hormones sort of level out and perform. So I think that's an important takeaway for people to listen to. If you're tempted by this ketogenic diet, really look at what is involved to remain in that state of ketosis, if that's actually what you're seeking, or look at opportunities like, oh, well, this sounds like it would work for me to create a caloric deficit. I don't necessarily have to like get into the state of ketosis to do that.
Right. Absolutely.
So one of the other things I wanted to talk about, I listened to this great webinar a little while ago by a dietitian. Her name is Diana Leonard Gulata. She works at the University of Virginia Health System, and she specializes in neurology and the ketogenic diet. So she's a clinical dietitian that works in this area. So she actually has the lab values available and the very, controlled setting. And here is, I wanted to share her list of potential side effects. And again, this is with adherence to the ketogenic diet for prolonged periods of time. We see some GI side effects like constipation, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and reflux. About 12 to 50 of her patients will experience one or all of those. Constipation, she thinks, is probably the most common. And this is This is because if you think about the foods that provide fiber to us, fruits, veggies, whole grains, legumes, they all have carbohydrates. So in some cases of the ketogenic diet, people think, oh yeah, you're eating loads of vegetables. Well, again, let's go back to that whole idea of, is this actually controlled for the amount of carbohydrates? I mean, 10 grams of carbs to 60 grams of carbs is actually quite a difference in your day if you're putting it together with foods. And we have to discern between net carbs or total carbs. So total carbohydrate would be like if you weighed and measured every little thing you ate and analyzed it, and you had like that number of carbohydrates that your food supplies. That's your total carb. Net carb is when you look at fiber content of that food and you subtract the grams of fiber. That's your net carbohydrate, because that's what your body would, the idea is that's what your body would actually use for energy and would result in an insulin response and yield calories. We already learned in previous episodes that fiber doesn't yield calories. It helps with digestion and your gut flora. So net carb versus total carb is very important here. And if people are really tightly controlling or eliminating those foods that have high fiber, constipation, results. So that's something to think about. Secondary carnitine deficiency. And she was really strongly for having lab values drawn for carnitine specifically and looking at serum carnitine status. Hyperlipidemia, she sees in 14 to 59% of her patients. Metabolic acidosis, so that's if we get ketones too high and they're being too restrictive. Hypoglycemia, kidney stones is another big one. Vitamin and mineral deficiencies. So again, you're eliminating, dairy, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes. I mean, all of a sudden you can start running some deficits in some vitamins and minerals. Possible decrease in linear growth. So this again is in children if you just don't have enough calories and nutrients to support that growth, and then a decrease in bone density. And those are all, the bone density one, she even said it's kind of like par for the course. It's almost always seen and observed, and it's just really paying attention to that and monitoring that in a lab setting to make sure. So I present this list to say, I bet that 99% of people who claim that they're going to do the keto diet or they're on keto are not having these metrics monitored on a regular basis in a clinical setting. So either you are running a very high risk of having some profound health implications from this, or you're not truly in sustained ketosis for long term.
And just to piggyback on that, the issue with decreased bone density is then we're setting ourselves up for osteopenia and osteoporosis, even at younger ages. And that's a real problem. You don't want those things. So I looked up real quick, just out of curiosity, we're talking about like for real true ketosis, we're like at 10, 20, grams of carbs. So a cup of broccoli, 1 cup of broccoli, a cup is not very much, right? Like 1 cup. This is a small
cooked or raw,
vegetable.
cooked or raw,
chopped
or florets. I mean,
I don't know.
This is how precise we have to get people.
Yeah.
Just saying.
I don't know. It doesn't say here, but a cup, I don't know, roughly 5 grams of carbohydrate. So there's 25% of your carbohydrate. If you're doing 20, if you're doing 10, that's half. So you're not going to be able to get in a bunch of fruits and vegetables and keep carbs that low, because even though like fruits and vegetables are lower typically in the carbohydrate value, they're not, astronomical, like, a hoagie or a piece of pizza, whatever. When your carbohydrates have to stay that low, an apple takes up a big chunk, and if you go beyond that and you get out of ketosis, well, then you're not in ketosis anymore. You're not doing the ketogenic diet. So you got to stay under it. And so it really does restrict your fruits and vegetable consumption, and which should not have to be explained at all, that this is an issue. Like, we already don't eat enough fruits and vegetables, like pretty much everybody. Less, how does this make sense? So I think this would be a good time. Do you want to go from this right into that kind of the
food list,
the meal plan thing for now? This is true ketosis. This is for treating someone like in a clinical setting, right?
Yeah, in a clinical setting. So this is a sample 1,500 calorie menu for the classical ketogenic diet.
Okay, so as you go through this, I want, myself included, I want everybody to listen. Where are fruit and vegetable like amounts at?
Right.
Okay.
And picture what this might look like on your plate as you're, or in a bowl.
And imagine yourself like serving this too, like going through this process. Like,
how would this
with my
taste?
Thoughts,
how would this taste? What would your enjoyment be? Would you naturally put these kinds of foods together? So the source of this is from Today's Dietitian, which is an organization of dietitians. They provide continuing education credits, and they have annual symposium. It's vetted by a community of dietitians, and they have a publication. I'll provide the link in our show notes. So sample 1,500 calorie menu for classic ketogenic diet.
Yes. Let me do one disclaimer. So as we go through this, any fun we poke is not at this clinical thing. Like, this is a like a meal plan in a clinical way to treat something specifically. Okay. Yes. This is an appropriate thing for certain people. That needs to be acknowledged. What we're poking fun of is the idea of taking this very restrictive, very clinical thing and saying, hey, everybody do this. So let's keep that in mind as we go through this, because I think that's an important distinction.
So they have this split into meal components and then approximate household measurements. So the meal component side, it's split into breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and it's talking in terms of grams, down to the 10th of a gram of weight. So very, very tightly controlled. Yeah. And then they approximate it to approximate household measurements. Okay. So breakfast is heavy whipping cream, 2 ounces, 0.5 egg. So that is a half of an egg, people. 2 strips of bacon, 2.5 pats of butter, 1 packet of mayonnaise, and 1 teaspoon of peaches. 1 teaspoon of peaches, approximately 6 grams.
I want everyone just for a moment to imagine a teaspoon
of peaches,
and how ridiculously small it is, right? Like the teaspoon's nothing. Like, do you just scoop out of the peach like a little melon baller kind of thing?
Any of you who have fed babies and you have pureed peaches sitting in front of you, and you take that little baby spoon and you like help your baby eat the little mouthful of peaches. Yeah, that's about it.
Yeah,
one bite.
That's it. That's what you get. That's what you get of peaches. So this peach is going to last you 3 weeks, which is real nice, And I like the mayonnaise packet. Like, where does that go? What do I put that on? My half an egg?
Like, what? Can you imagine people are like hoarding the mayonnaise packets from like the deli from the grocery store, and they're like, it's for my breakfast.
Because you can't, where else do you get mayonnaise packets?
No, I guess you could buy them at like a restaurant supply store.
I guess.
Maybe they have them in the store.
Maybe you put the mayonnaise in the heavy whipping cream and make a little
mix
shake.
It all up. Make a little smoothie, a little fat smoothie, butter,
all right, so breakfast heavy is whipping off to cream. A great start.
Okay, for lunch, we've got that 2 ounces of heavy cream again.
That's your drink.
2.5 macadamia nuts. So get out your little knife and cut that nut. in half. Cut that nut.
They're so
That's going on a coffee mug.
Like macadamia nuts are so small. They're like a garbanzo bean.
All right. We have 1.5 slices of deli ham. And I have a caveat to this. We read another website that I'll talk about in just a second that says no deli meats that have had any kind of sugary marinade or additive to them. So this deli ham can't be like Black Forest ham or honey ham.
Or brown sugar
right?
ham.
Yeah. And then 0.5 slice of American cheese, which I'm just like so disappointed that they even have American cheese on here. Like you don't even get real cheddar.
Well, are they in America? Because maybe they're just patriots, Aaron. Okay. Jeez.
Freedom fries.
Freedom cheese.
There are no freedom fries on this diet. Okay, moving on. 1 packet of mayonnaise, 1 teaspoon of oil, somewhat random there. Like where do you put that teaspoon of oil? You roll it up in your half a slice of American cheese,
right in your mouth.
Drink it.
Yeah.
And then 2 teaspoons of applesauce. You get 2 teaspoons.
Well,
up in the world.
Living that high life. Okay.
And just to give you real quick an idea of, I listed the household measurements, but this is like 6.6 grams of macadamia nuts, 19.6 grams of deli ham, 8.4 grams of American cheese. This is very precise.
Yeah. So we're through lunch and we have
and we're hungry.
3 teaspoons of fruit and no vegetables, right? There's no vegetables
yet? No veggies yet.
All right. So
moving on to dinner.
Okay.
2 ounces of heavy cream, 1 hot dog, 1 packet of mayonnaise, 1 teaspoon of oil. So I'm picturing this and 1 tablespoon of broccoli. So I'm picturing this hot dog with a string of mayonnaise down it, and you're dipping it in oil and eating it and then washing it down with your heavy cream.
Yeah, because you got to have a greasy hot dog, right? Yeah, it's got to be.
I guess there's no other way.
Nope.
2 tablespoons of broccoli, y'all.
Greasy wiener.
God. I don't know if I can continue.
What's for dinner tonight, Mom?
Greasy wieners.
Oily wieners.
And half a nut. You got to cut that nut and get your greasy wiener. Oh my God. I knew this was going to happen. This is why we put off this podcast forever. Because we can't talk.
Oh my God. Okay.
So just let's just pause and appreciate what that food would look like on your plate. You know, one of the things that we learned through our schooling in dietetics is how to build a menu around textures and colors and temperature variation and flavor and all this stuff. And I'm just picturing these foods that are a lot of kind of white and brown and bland looking foods just on the plate. You've got your little bit of peaches and your little bit of broccoli.
Did they say a tablespoon
all the color
of broccoli? Is that what it was? Like, how would you even, like, that's one like little tiny floret, or what are they called?
Yeah. 1 tablespoon of broccoli.
Yeah. Very bland, a lot of beige, like brownish, yellowish. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Not much, even the peach and the applesauce are brown. Yeah. So, that is a sample menu. And I will say that, I mean, we looked through and I could probably go through food lists and put together a sample menu and calculate it all out if I had the specific parameters from a clinical setting. I didn't do that. I just got on the internet to see what I could find that was actually from a reputable source, like dietitians that are practicing in this area. And I will tell you, it was really challenging to find an actual, ketogenic diet plan that has been vetted by dietitians. And I would suspect that that part of that is because most of the ketogenic diet websites you see are trying to sell you something. They want to sell you a membership or a book or their supplements or,
take these exogenous ketones, whatever it is. And there isn't a lot of widely available, well-designed ketogenic diet information available out there. They want you to go to the hospital and see the dietitian and
right,
get this,
because that's
make
how
sure that
it's
you're,
that's how it's supposed to be used, is in a clinical setting. And while we're kind of laughing about like the restrictiveness of this, it makes sense in a clinical setting, right? Like when you're treating things, often things are very strict. There are very specific protocols we have to follow, right? Like that's how that works. But if we look at how restrictive this really is and take that restriction and put it on just your average person who wants to lose 20, 30 pounds, like this is like insanity now. Like you're cutting a macadamia nut in half. You can't have 3.
right?
First of all, just 2.5. I mean, that's like nothing, but like it's so restrictive and so specific. And while this is a little bit more extreme because it is clinical, it's the same thinking and same approach that we often take no matter what we do, is we get very, very hardcore about things that do not matter at all. And we get very rigid and very specific and very restrictive. And we know, you all know, probably all of you listening know, this almost 100% of the time does not work out in the long run. It may work out short term. Sure. Like lots of things do. We can do whatever for short periods of time, right? We can really punish ourselves, but long term, it doesn't work out. And the more restrictive something is, usually the bigger rebound we have when we finally are like, F it, right? Like I can't do this anymore. The more tightly we've controlled things, usually the bigger kind of rubber band effect we have, launching us into like, I'm eating all the things that I haven't been able to eat, right? And so it's I don't know. I'm done.
So one of the other things that the dietitian I mentioned earlier, Diana Lenner, what did I say her last name? Anyway, she talked about some of the implications of, again, turning the ketogenic diet into a mainstream practice and possibly experiencing similar effects to yo-yo dieting, which we have a good body of evidence that says yo-yo dieting is damaging to metabolism. It's damaging to food relationship. It's obviously not sustainable because otherwise there would be no yo-yo. She is concerned about some of the in and out of ketosis types of practices that people will engage in. There are no cheat days on an actual ketogenic diet. It's not like you're keto for 5 days of the week and then you go on the weekends and enjoy, toast with your breakfast and have a bowl of cereal and eat some pasta for dinner, like a normal, just balanced diet. You're not supposed to do that on a typical ketogenic diet. So, I mean, then we could get into the whole, we already talked about there are low carb approaches where it's not as restrictive. You're not like putting your body into the state of ketosis and then bringing it out again. But I mean, she's been in this field, practicing for the last 4 or 5 years in a clinical setting. I would heed her concerns about, we don't really know what this could do if you're truly engaging in a ketogenic diet and then you're busting yourself out of it for a cheat day or for a weekend. So just keep that in mind, that yo-yo kind of effect could be something just to think about.
Yeah. And then, I mean, like we've talked about a lot, just beyond just physically and metabolically, what it might do. What is it doing to your brain? What is it doing to your thoughts? What is it doing to your mindset and the way you think about yourself and the way you think about food and your relationship to it and your relationship with your body? Like, what is it doing just in how you, like your mental well-being in life, because like we've talked about a bunch, that's really important too. And what we see when people go on super restrictive diets like this and expect miracles is they wind up coming out the other side desperate and hopeless and defeated and just having 3 more months of evidence that they're just not cut out to do this. And it really pisses me off because we have people who are in this industry, in the wellness industry, you know, diet, nutrition, fitness, whatever, that are claiming to have your best interest at heart and are actively telling you to do things that are 100% opposed to your best interest. That they're telling you have to do things in this way, and here, buy this thing from me so that you can do it in this way because it's the only way you're going to be successful. And if you don't do it this way, it's never going to work. And then when it doesn't work, it just fuels this belief that you're broken, that you don't have what it takes. You're not strong enough. You're just not cut out for it, you know, whatever. And this is an industry that's telling you to take care of yourself and is doing things that actively makes it harder to take care of yourself. And it's maddening. And that's why, like, you know, for me, I won't speak for Aaron, but I think probably true is that it's the ketogenic, it pisses me off so much, the ketogenic diet, not because of the diet, but because of how it's manifested in society and what it is. And just kind of our understanding of things, right? Like it's become you have to do this. Carbs are evil. Sugar is evil. Gluten is evil. Like they're literally killing you. And you have to avoid these things. And it makes it so challenging for us just to exist and navigate daily life unnecessarily. And that's where I just really have a beef with keto. Is an issue.
And to your point, I work with several clients that have done different dietary approaches, different yo-yo kinds of, you know, super restriction, this and that. And it can be really hard to undo that belief system that's still there. Even if you do hit that point where you're like, oh, I'm a failure. I can't do this right. I'm broken. You still have that voice in your head or that belief that, but I'm not supposed to be doing this. This is a bad thing. And so then it reinforces like, oh, I have no self-discipline. I'm not doing it right. Even if you have agreed with me and yourself and, you know, many of the experts that, hey, this isn't sustainable and this isn't, you know, carbs aren't bad. It's very likely you still have that little, you know, thought in your head and that belief system. It takes a while to undo that.
It really does. And then what you see is people have like 2 or 3 months of success, quote unquote success. It all falls apart. But then they're like emotionally tied to what brought about those 2 or 3 months of success. You know, and we've talked about this before, but like how many times have you had something like, I just need to get back to keto because that's what worked. And it's like, well, if it worked, why aren't you still doing it?
Right.
Like,
right.
So it worked for a time. Like that's that's the rest of the sentence because it didn't work. Otherwise you'd still be doing it. But because we have this success, like, oh, I lost 30 pounds. So I got to do it again. And it's like, so you can gain all back. Like, it's not going to be different this time around. Like, what do you think's changed?
Yeah. And one of the other things, so I have 2 last things before we wrap up here. One is this food list that Michael and I found simultaneously when we were going through some of the notes here that is by everydayhealth.com. It's a ketogenic diet. It says comprehensive food list. And I'm telling you, under each category, there's no more than 5 foods listed. So comprehensive. And I'm not going to read through all of these, but I just want to point out that here are the categories. So under each category of food, you know, they have protein, they have oil and fat, they have fruits and vegetables, whatever. They have liberally, occasionally, and never as their metrics here. So you can liberally eat these kinds of protein, grass-fed beef, fish, especially fatty fish like salmon, dark meat, chicken, liberally. Occasionally bacon, which is really interesting because I have seen bacon on just about every ketogenic diet plan I have come across from, you know, clients or clinicians.
People are
low fat proteins, right? Occasionally low fat proteins like skinless breast and shrimp. These are great to include in your keto diet, but add a sauce on top for some fat rather than eating them plain. So, okay, encouraging the added fat. Never, that word just is triggering, right? Because think about this. You can never again, as long as you're following the ketogenic diet, have cold cuts with added sugar, meat that has been marinated in sugary sauces. Bye-bye barbecue. No barbecue ribs. All right. No brisket. Fish or chicken nuggets. So no fish sticks, no chicken nuggets, no
chicken nuggets.
Like Yeah, probably. I mean, chicken wings. So again, when we get into the details on some of this and just the way this is presented, you can never have potatoes, corn, or raisins. Never. This is a comprehensive list, y'all. So
if you eat one raisin,
it's over.
It's over.
So again, the way this changes your approach to food and your relationship with food. And then the last thing I wanted to point out was that unsolicited email that I got. Let me just pull it up because I was like, where the F did you guys get my information and why are you sending this to me? It honestly, it ends up in the one email address that I have that tends to get the spammiest, junkiest crap on it. So it's from Keto. That's the sender is Keto.
The diet wrote you?
The diet. I know.
It knows who you are.
Special. I know.
And man.
Okay. So Keto, and it says the easiest way to burn fat. That's the subject. It has a picture of the newest Baywatch cast, which is Zac Efron, The Rock. I don't know who the women are, but they're running on the beach. They look super ripped and lean. And it says, ready to get fit the Hollywood way, burn fat, boost metabolism, and shed the weight the Hollywood way. The Baywatch stars spill their secrets. Read the exclusive story. Okay. So I clicked on it and I'm like, I got to see, because we're talking about the ketogenic diet soon. I'm like, I got to see what this says. It literally takes me to this site that is it might have a second page, but I feel like I only was able to find one page, and it has nothing to do with the Baywatch stars. It has nothing about them spilling their secrets. All it has is this like bottle of supplements and all of these claims and before and after pictures. It doesn't tell you what the supplements are. It doesn't have a nutrition facts label. It just says sign up today and get 1 month free and all this bullshit. Like it's just trying to get your money. And this is one of those, I know a lot of our listeners would probably be like, oh, I would never fall prey to that. I just want you to realize that the diet industry has all kinds of little tricks and ways to convince you that A, what you're doing is not enough or it's wrong. So you need to do it our way. And B, I'm going to hook you with this promise, but I'm really just after your money. I don't really care if you're healthy, if this is sustainable, or if there's evidence to back it up. And that's one thing I would encourage people to do is when you search things on the internet, like a lot of the stuff I found was putting in the search bar clinical ketogenic diet, evidence, or a clinical ketogenic diet, dietitian. Those kinds of things. And then I would even further have to vet those websites, going through them and be like, is this a reputable source? Is it an educational institution? What are they after? Something like this, unsolicited email, sure, it's just a spammy email. You probably delete it without even clicking and reading it. I just want you to realize that this stuff is just prolific. And this is one of the trashiest examples of how the diet industry is out to get your money, and that's it. That's all it wants. And so these websites that you come across and that make these promises, that's what they want. Is your money.
Yep.
So,
because they know if you try it and you have success for a couple months, right? Even if it all falls apart, you're going to return to that. You're probably going to purchase from them again because maybe now I can do it for life. You know what I mean? And we get emotionally attached to those moments of success. And we think that the thing we did that got us a short-term success is the thing that we have to do forever. And they know that. And so it doesn't matter if you're successful long-term because you're going to come back. Yeah. So this morning, just about 2 hours before it was record time, it was last minute, but on my Instagram and Middleish, I just threw up like, hey, we're doing a podcast about keto, any questions? And so we got one question. I should have done it yesterday. I just forgot, or I didn't think about it actually, but from Sue, she was asking about dirty keto versus clean keto. Because have you heard of dirty keto? It's like a newer thing.
And
just when you thought, it couldn't just be keto. Now we've got to have types of keto. So
dirty keto and clean. Oh my God.
dirty keto and clean keto. So
you're serious.
I'm for real skis. So clean keto would be a typical approach, right? Like looking at trying to
washing your
focus
produce.
on, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Put in the washing machine. But like looking at focus mostly on more on whole foods, that kind of stuff. Dirty keto is essentially, it's essentially like if it fits your macros, but with keto. Like you can eat fast food, you can eat highly processed stuff, you can eat whatever, just as long as you make it fit your magical macronutrient.
Yeah, that's
split.
actually something I wanted to touch on today, but we're kind of running out of time. So this is a good question. Good question.
Yeah. So it's, which I don't have any problem, with fast food or processed stuff as a part of, stuff to eat once in a while, but it's essentially, it's taking that macronutrient split and saying like, you can basically eat whatever, as long as it fits within this and you're fine. So that's essentially what that is. I would not be a fan of that. I would discourage that. Just because you're already limited so much anyway including, I don't know how you do it, to be honest. Like, how would you eat fast food and keep your carbs so low? Like, that's going to be real tricky,
Well, I think the
grilled stuff, but
get that greasy wiener. You just greasy wiener it all day long.
Greasy wiener.
Drive through the Sonic
long
and be like, I want a greasy wiener with extra mayo and no bun, please.
And maybe half a nut.
Put some whipped cream on that. Yeah. And cut that nut.
Cut that nut.
So,
okay. That really does need to go on like a mug. Cut that nut. Greasy wieners all day long.
The dirty keto diet was something else that I wanted to touch on, because just like any other fad diet, we have the Whole30, we have paleo, we have gluten-free, we have keto, a lot of different diet crazes, even Atkins. They're very rapidly, after the diet emerges as a trend, the food industry comes out guns a-blazing and produces all kinds of options for you to simply go pick off the shelf. So let's take something like the paleo diet. When we look at, and I love hearing someone like Dr. David Katz talk about this. If you don't know who he is, Google his work. David Katz, Katz. He's amazing. And I love his pragmatic yet incredibly intelligent and well-researched approach to these things. He says, when you look at the origins of many of these fad diets and how they have come to be, there's really an agreement for the foundation of how these patterns should be carried out. Stick to whole foods as close to their natural state as possible, include more plant foods like nuts and seeds and legumes, include more vegetables, like make stuff at home, pay attention to portion size. And all of these things, right? Yeah. Keto is very different from vegan and that kind of thing. But if you really look at like the integrity of most of these diets at their origin, there's a lot of agreement across the board. And if you were to get practitioners in a room and discuss this, many of them would be like, yeah, okay, there's a lot of agreement here. What happens is then we get the food industry and some of the extremists that are proselytizing these diets and saying like, this is the only way, who then take this, core concept and start whittling it down into this very specific extreme way of eating. And the food industry endorses that and says, okay, as long as it has paleo friendly or keto approved on the label, people are going to buy it. So that's where you get these keto brownie mixes and keto pancakes and paleo friendly pork rinds and all of these other things that the food industry takes and puts into essentially junk food and highly processed foods. So that would be my, obviously my caveat with any diet. Even people who have diabetes and are controlling their diet with their blood sugars through artificial sweeteners or non-nutritive sweetener options, you can still get a whole truckload of highly processed, nutrient poor food that is not going to spike your insulin, but it's also not going to help your cause from a health standpoint. Right. So I think it's important to be honest with yourself there. If it sounds too good to be true, like you just get to eat Atkins bars all day and it's fine, that's we're on the wrong track there.
Yeah. And then it's like, okay, what's the point? Is the point just to lose weight, or is the point to be healthier? Because there's a difference, right? Like if
or
you
is it just to claim
weight,
that I'm on this diet? I'm on Atkins, or I'm keto.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah. You could eat 3 Snicker bars a day and lose weight. You're going to feel terrible, and things aren't going to work well, but sure.
And I love a Snickers. I love it.
What's your favorite? Have we talked about your favorite candy bar?
I don't think so, but I do need to just give a shout out to peanut butter Snickers, because this week was it Monday? Matt came home. They shoot candy at the studio because they do a lot of food photography and video.
Not and with guns, they have with cameras.
Truckload with cameras. Yeah. They don't like target practice the Kit Kat, throw it in the air. So he has a whole bunch of Halloween candy at their photography studio, and he brought some home. We don't know how many trick-or-treaters we'll get or anything, but we have a truckload of candy, and we pick through, and we have like a lot of the same favorites. And we found a couple of peanut butter Snickers in there, and we were talking about how delicious they are. So he came home Monday, and he walks into my office, and he just sets down this little bite-sized peanut butter Snickers. And he's like, I dumped out the entire candy bowl and rifled through it, and I found one peanut butter Snickers, and I brought it home to you instead of eating it myself. He's like, that's true love. He made it a point to make sure I knew that. There. So anyway, I think Snickers, Reese's, peanut butter cups, those are probably really high up there on my 2 faves.
Twix. You like Twix?
Mm-hmm. I do. Yeah. I would choose a Snickers over a Twix usually.
Yeah. Snickers is pretty good. Mm-hmm. So Snickers, peanut butter Snickers, if you want to sponsor us,
I know.
I'd take a sponsorship from Snickers at all heartbeat.
Totally. Okay. So we have gone over time here. Yeah. Thank you so much for sticking with us. This obviously was a long time coming, and we wanted to try and hit on, most of the major highlights of the keto diet. So if you have more questions, thank you, Sue, for your question, and bring them on if you have more, or if you want us to delve into this topic a little further.
Yeah, we can do a part 2 for sure. There's a bunch of stuff I didn't say that I wanted to say, so I'm sure you're the same. So we can do a part 2. Just let us know.
There was a lot of hat adjustment going on when you were talking about. I don't know what else to say. All right, meaning in the mundane.
You want to go ahead? You want me to?
Yeah, I already alluded. Yeah, I already mentioned a bit of mine this last weekend. We have been in our house for almost 2 months now, and we finally hung pictures. And it's such a simple task. It's something that you sort of tell yourself, I'll do that eventually, or it doesn't have to be done. It's not a priority. But honestly, like Matt walked by, his dad taught art classes in high school and built these frames out of barnwood. And so we have some of his art, his paintings with these handmade frames that we've hung in our house. And Matt walked by one of the pictures we hung up, and he's like, that sparks joy. Just like Marie Kondo, would say. So it's such a simple thing, but it really does make an impact. Like our house just feels more like us. And, it's just, you walk by it and you're like, oh, I love that, that picture or that scene. So anyway,
nice.
That's ours.
I love it. Awesome. For me, it was just a few nights ago. So my best friend lives up there in Boise. And, we don't get to see each other very often, but, let's see, today's Wednesday, maybe Monday night, maybe Sunday night. I don't know. Within the last few nights, we were like, hey, you want to chat tonight after kids are asleep or whatever? And like, yeah. And so, we hopped on the phone, and we hopped on Discord, which is an app where you can kind of chat music and stuff. Yeah. So we hopped on Discord, and I was thinking we'd chat for a little bit, and we wound up just like playing music, like taking turns playing songs for each other and just talking. And we wound up just like hanging out for like 2.5 hours. And
I love it.
So it wasn't something that I really planned on, but it was like this, even though we weren't together, we got to just hang out. Like there wasn't a purpose, there wasn't a time constraint. We were just chatting and playing music. And sometimes, we wouldn't talk for the whole song, And it was just this easy, time together. And I was like, man, it felt like we just hung out, and we haven't got to hang out in a long time. And it was really, really nice. In fact, like right afterwards, I sent him a text. I was like, man, that was really nice. I wasn't expecting that. I was like, I was just going to text you the same thing. Like, that was awesome. I needed that.
I love it.
So it was just, we talked several times a week, but it was this just sort of routine thing that turned into this, like, let's just stay here a while because this is really nice. So that was mine.
That's great. Yeah. And I love that technology plays a role in that in a positive way,
right. Yeah,
keeping us connected.
Exactly.
So thank you so much for hanging with us this long, everyone.
Much.
And we would love to hear from you. So reach out on Middleish. What are we on Instagram? Middleish podcast. I'm terrible, you guys. Please, we're at Middleish.
Middleish_podcast.
Middleish_podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm going to go have another cup of coffee so I can actually get my thoughts together.
Right.
All right. Have a great day.